Hello, math people, and we are now going to take a look at our first lesson of Chapter 5, which happens to be the first lesson of our pre-algebra unit. So moving away from a lot of the operational-based things we've been doing and moving into our first look at algebra-related topics. So there are going to be two videos for Chapter 5, Lesson 1. I'm cutting this lesson in half into two parts. Because the first part of this lesson is very based in vocab, math vocabulary that's important. And I know that vocab is sometimes boring, you don't want to think about it, but it's important to know these words because if we're using them, and you will be for the rest of your time in math in 6th grade and beyond, if you don't know what these words mean, you're already lost. So it's important to get a good understanding of what these words mean and how to use them when it comes to algebra. So the first thing that we talked about in this lesson is what exactly is an algebraic expression? What does that even mean? So an algebraic expression, if I were to give you a loose definition, is a math sentence that contains three things. And we need, in our math sentences, numbers, obviously, something to work with. Operations, something to do to those numbers. So your operations are add, subtract, multiply, divide. And lastly, since this is an algebraic expression, what makes it algebra? It's the presence of variables, which we'll define in a moment if you're not sure what a variable is. So when we're talking about an algebraic expression, we're talking about something like this, 5p plus 4, something you've generally seen. We've got numbers, we've got an operation. The thing that you might not be as familiar with is having a letter, and that is what a variable is. So let's go into some more deeper vocab related to this lesson. And those are the three main parts in any expression. So let's first start with variables. A variable is typically a letter that represents some unknown number. So in this expression, 5p plus 4, p represents some number, whether it be 10, 15, 0, 1. Later in the year, we'll be learning how to solve and figure out what that variable actually represents. In this chapter, I'm going to be giving you the value of p. I'll tell you what that thing is equal to and how to use it. But for now, just focusing on the vocab, what is a variable? A variable is a letter that represents some unknown number in an algebraic expression. All right, the second vocab word that's important to know, plays off of variable, kind of goes with it, and that is the word coefficient. Bit of a weird word, but think of other words that have co-worker, for example, someone that you work with. A coefficient is the number that is being multiplied by the variable. So right here we've got 5p. That means 5 times p. That's just another way to express multiplication. And the number that's with the variable that's being multiplied by it, 5, that is known as a coefficient. So we'll put the number that is a factor with a variable. Factor being a number that you multiply. So a coefficient, the number that's being multiplied by the variable. And I'll add in this little extra information. All variables All variables, no matter what, have a coefficient. So no matter what, if it's a variable, it has to have a coefficient. There's going to be something that's being multiplied by it. So just keep that in mind, and we'll come back to that point a little bit later in this lesson. The third word that we should talk about and define is the word constant. That's the last part of an algebraic expression. A constant. So a constant, think about the word constant outside of math. If something is constant, it is always. For example, a silly example would be like the sun. The sun is always there. It's a constant in our universe. It's just this always shining thing. It's always there. So a constant in an algebraic expression is something that is constantly the same. And that's going to be any number that's by itself. That doesn't have a variable with it. So in our example over here, 5p plus 4, 4 would be the constant. There's nothing with it. So it's not being multiplied by anything, divided by anything. It's all by itself. It's just the number 4. It's constantly 4 in this expression. Whereas 5 times p, depending on what p is equal to, this part of the expression could change a little bit. For example, if p is equal to 2, 5 times 2 is 10. If p is equal to 5, 5 times 5 is 25. This part can change. Whereas the whole number 4 is constant. It's constantly the same. Don't get too hung up on these words, but I'm going to be using them, as will all of your math teachers going forward. And when they refer to a variable or a coefficient's a big word, or constant, you want to know what they're talking about. Constant, the number by itself. The variable is the letter, so in this one that would be p. And a coefficient is the number being multiplied by the variable. In this case, that would be 5. That would be our coefficient. Another big vocab word for this unit, I'm going to put it as our fourth and final word on this list, is the word term. So this is one, definitely know what it means. You're going to be using this word yourself actually a ton this year, but you'll hear me referring to terms a lot. We're going to work a lot with terms. Term is just a fancy word that means, I like to call it the pieces or the parts of an expression. So let's go with a new example. Let's go with 5p plus 4. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Minus 6x plus 3. All right, so we've got a lot of things here. So I can see I've got some variables, that would be p and x. I've got some constants as well, some numbers that are by themselves, 4 and 3. I can see that both of those variables have a coefficient. The coefficient of p is 5, and the coefficient of x is 6. All right, great. We've got those three first words down. But what is a term? A term is each little part of this expression. 5p is a term. 4 is a term. 6x is a term. And 3 is a term. So in this expression that I wrote out, there are 4 terms. And you'll notice that where I circled, what's in between each of those? Either an addition or a subtraction sign. So let's add to this little definition here. A term are all of the pieces or parts of an expression separated by addition or subtraction. So when you look at an expression and you're wondering to yourself, or someone asks you how many terms are in the expression, you're basically looking at all of the little pieces that are there and all of the pieces that are separated by an addition or a subtraction sign. So 5 times p, that's one term. 4, that's another term. 6x, that's another term. And 3, that would be another term. And we'll be talking a whole lot more about terms as this unit goes on. But for now, just understand that terms, very simply, are just the pieces, the parts of an expression. So some of the questions that you'll be asked on this basic vocab level for this unit would be pretty simple, and that'd be like identifying all of the things, all of the vocab words. So let's list these out. Terms, variables, constants, and lastly coefficients. All right, so the first thing, start at the basic level, is terms, aka how many pieces or parts are in this particular expression. And remember, we're looking for an addition or a subtraction sign because that's what separates terms. So I noticed that there are two terms, 5x and 13. Those are the two terms that are present. So the terms are 5x and 13. All right. Next question would be, what are the variables, if any, in this expression? And this expression does have a variable, and that'd be x, the letter x. All right. One variable, and it's x. Now, if you're thinking about your vocab words, coefficients actually kind of plays along with variables. We said that coefficients are the number that's being multiplied by the variable, the number in front of the variable. Every variable has a coefficient, so if you have a variable, you better have a coefficient that goes with it. So what goes with the x? That would be 5. Lastly, are there any constants in this expression? There does happen to be one, and constants are numbers by themselves, so the term 13 is a constant. So a quick rundown, two terms, 5x and 13. One of the terms is a constant, that would be 13. The other term, 5x, has a variable x, and the coefficient for that variable is 5. Let's do one more of these before we wrap this video up. All right, kind of funky looking, but we can do this. Let's make our list. So we've got terms, variables, coefficients. I'll list that next since it goes along with variables. And lastly, constants. All right, so what are the terms? How many are there? I noticed that there are 1, 2, 3 terms, 3 pieces in this expression. And they're all separated in this case by addition signs. 2z squared, 2z to the second power, that's one of the terms. Another one of the terms is y, and the last term here is 3. All right, so I can see just looking at these that one of the terms is a constant, a number by itself, and that would be the term 3. So that one's out of the way. All right, variables. Are there any? Of course there are. There's 2 variables. One of the variables is the letter z, and the other variable is the letter y. And since we have 2 variables listed, we better have 2 coefficients listed because, as I said earlier, every variable has a coefficient. Now, one of the variables and its coefficient is pretty clear. And I think the one that's pretty clear is with z, there's this 2 that's being multiplied by it. That's the number that's with the variable. So the coefficient for z is 2. We can see it. It's obvious, plain as day. There it is. The other variable, y, you might be thinking to yourself, well, that doesn't have a coefficient. There's no number there. All right, so here's where you have to be a little careful. Every variable has a coefficient. It's the number that's being multiplied by the variable. If you don't see something there, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have a coefficient. What it means is its coefficient is the number 1. Technically, and this sounds a little silly, but technically every number is being multiplied by 1, right? 1 times y is just y. Just like 1 times 2 is just 2, or 1 times 7 is just 7. Anything multiplied by 1 is itself. Now the reason that in math you won't see someone write 1y typically is because it's a little redundant to say 1 times y when that's the same thing as just y. So most often, I'd say 99% of the time, if there's a variable by itself, it's always going to be written by itself. Most people don't write out like 1x when you have x, or 1g when you have g. They just show the variable, but it still has a coefficient, and its coefficient is 1. And that might seem a little pointless right now. You might be thinking, well, who cares? Why does that matter? It comes into play in a big way in a lesson or two, and you will see how this impacts the terms. But for now, just make sure that you file that away, that every variable has a coefficient, and if it's got nothing in front of it, nothing that you see at least, its coefficient is just a 1. There's really a 1 there. And if you want to write it in whenever you see it, just to help yourself get used to that fact, write it in. Might be helpful. Y is the same thing as 1y. And that is part 1 of Chapter 5, Lesson 1, a rundown of major vocab words. If you're stuck on any of this, feel free to reach out, but it just takes time practicing and going over what all of the parts are and what all of the words mean. What I would do is just write out some expressions, or have someone else write one out for you, or Google algebraic expression, and then just quiz yourself. Make a little list, terms, variables, constants, coefficients, and see if you can list all the things out. I'm happy to go over it further with you. Just let me know. Otherwise, happy mathing.